Hi, thanks so much for joining me for today's vlog. And I'm going to share with you a dilemma that I've been wrestling with for many years now. And it's this: why is it that if you talk to just about any Christian and ask them, do you think that prayer is an important part of the Christian life? They would probably say yes. The vast majority would say yes. And yet, in the life of the church, the gathering that is always most difficult to get people to come and be part of in the life of the church is the prayer meeting. That's been my experience over many years. Trying to get people to come together to pray is really hard. And yet, when Jesus, in response to the disciples' request, Lord, teach us to pray, he gave them what we call the Lord's Prayer. He begins, Our Father. Is that not implied that there are times when we ought to gather together to pray? We certainly see that in the life of the early church. In those 10 days between the ascension of Jesus and the pouring out of the Spirit on the day of Pentecost, the church were together praying earnestly to God. I have a friend who I was at ministerial training college with. And when we all left college, he went to a particular situation with a number of rural churches. And in one of the churches where he became minister, they had a problem with the church roof. It was leaking, it was badly damaged, it was going to cost a lot of money to get repaired. And so they had a special meeting of the church leaders and the church members and the minister to try and decide what was the right course of action. And this meeting went on for quite some time, discussing the possibilities and how they should proceed. And after a while, my friend, the minister, said, look, I think we need to stop talking now and pray about it. And the elderly senior steward at that point said, nay, lad, this is serious. As if to say, what's the point in praying? You know, this is serious business. Do people not really believe that prayer works? Is that why it's so difficult to get people to take prayer seriously sometimes? I was listening to an interview with a man called Jon Tyson. He is a pastor and church planter in New York City. He's very well respected and speaks very clearly about matters of faith and life. And he was saying in this interview that he'd made a particular study of the times in history where spiritual revival has broken out. And not only has he read about them, but he's actually visited many of the places where these revivals began and took place. And he said that of all the places he visited, the place that really touched him and spoke very deeply to him was the Hebrides. I don't know if you know, but in the late 40s, early 50s, a wonderful spiritual revival took place in the Hebrides. And I've read about it before, but I thought I'd go and reread and remind myself of how that happened, how it all began. And it's a fascinating story. It begins in a small cottage in the village of Barvas. And in that cottage lived two elderly women, Peggy and Christine Smith. They were sisters. Peggy was 84, Christine was 82. So not spring chickens. Peggy was blind. Her sister was almost bent double with arthritis. But they felt a great burden for the area where they lived. The appalling state of that parish. There was apparently not a single young person who attended public worship. Not a single young man or woman went to church in that area. And they were desperately burdened. And as they prayed, God gave them a promise. He said to them, I will pour water upon him that is thirsty and floods upon the dry ground. And so they began to pray day and night for God to fulfill that promise to them. And one night Peggy had a revelation, a vision, if you like, a picture in her mind that revival was coming. And there would come a time when the church was crowded again with young people. So she sent for the minister and she told him what God had laid on her heart. And she asked him to call together the elders and deacons of the church for a special time of prayer and waiting upon God. And as the minister and the church leaders came together before God to repent, to say sorry to God, to pray, to cry out to God, God began to move powerfully amongst them. And a little bit later, a man called Duncan Campbell was invited to come and lead a 10-day mission in the area. He eventually agreed. He came for 10 days, but stayed for 2 years, during which thousands of people came to Christ. An amazing move of God in the Hebrides. It's well worth reading about that wonderful revival. And it started with 2 elderly women, so infirm that they could not even any longer go to the church building. We're not able to go to our church buildings right now, are we? But we can still cry out to God. We can still pray. Prayer makes a difference. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote this: "More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of." And if you read, one of the great things I love to do is to read biographies, and particularly of Christians, people who God has mightily used. And when you read the biography of a person who God has really used in wonderful ways, I think that almost without exception, that man or woman was a person of deep prayer, who spent time in prayer. Billy Graham said this: "To get nations back on their feet, we must first get down on our knees." And if we really want to see our society changed, if we really want to see the nations changed, we too must get down on our knees. That wonderful promise in 2 Chronicles 7:14. "If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, I will hear from heaven. I will answer their prayer. I will heal their land." We need to pray without ceasing, and God will respond. For God has given us this wonderful gift, that is prayer. God bless you. As you pray, may God move mightily within you and draw you to himself.